Well, bringing our guest, Don, just called in on our hotline, and a real great pleasure to welcome Don. You and I have watched this man for many years up in New York, WNBC Channel 4, the sports. Also, people around the country can see him or have seen him on the Today Show, and continues to contribute there. He's got a brand new book out, a great series of books he's been writing over the last few years called The Greatest Moments in Sports. This one's called Upsets and Underdogs. We're joined today by Len Berman on the telephone from out in Long Island. Len, is that you?
It is I. Hi, guys.
Hi, Len. How are you? Good. Doug Miles, Don Henderson. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you on, and it's interesting that we just got the book today, to be honest with you, and didn't have a chance to read. Doug and I chatted a little bit about it, and you probably weren't on when I said I'm in Santee, South Carolina right now, heading down to Florida, and Doug, of course, is in Sarasota, but you sort of geared it for some of the younger folks, some of the things that they really never had an opportunity to see or hear, and you've got them in your book.
Well, the series so far has been aimed at young readers, but I think the publisher does a nice job of making it look like a coffee table book. So I've had people buy the books for grandparents or for their dads because just the pictures and the descriptions and the accounts of this game are the express written opinion of mine, and also what the publisher does, which is great, they include a free audio CD. So many of the moments that are in the book, you will hear the original play-by-play calls. So I think it resonates on many different levels.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to that CD, Len. You got some great sports moments in there. You talk about, of course, the Miracle Mets in '69. I remember it well. I'm sure you do as well, Don. I guess you got some Lindsey Nelson on that. Is that who calls the Miracle Mets?
Well, you know, I'm not. They don't have play-by-play moments of all the games, of all the moments. So I'm not sure if the Mets are on there. The Mets were in one of my earlier books where they had some of the World Series calls. But the compelling, fun thing about the '69 Mets, for people who didn't, just say, well, they won the World Series, is that they came into existence 7 years earlier and were perhaps the worst franchise in baseball history. They only won 40 games in their initial season in 1962. and the only thing interesting about the team was Casey Stengel, their manager. And his famous quote was, "Can't anybody here play this game?" But I dug up another quote of his, which I got a big kick out of. Here's the manager of the team. He says, "There's only one thing worse than a Mets game." He said, "A Mets doubleheader."
Well, that really, in those days, I'll tell you, it was hard to watch them. No question. They were one of the worst teams ever put together. And we were talking earlier, just before you joined us, and it's ironic how the Chicago Cubs can go so long without winning a pennant or a World Series. The Washington Senators, and, of course, the Nationals being in right now, a big story in Washington, D.C., and yet the Mets did it in just a few years.
Well, that's the thing. You bring up a great point about the Cubs, because you'd almost think you could throw darts and put together a team.
Right.
Just about every franchise has been in a World Series, has been there. I mean, for goodness sakes, the Houston Astros were in the World Series a couple of years back. So, I mean, you would think that just about any team could make it. And here, this Cub franchise, and it's not that they haven't had money to spend over the years. It really is just mind-boggling that they haven't been able to get there.
Well, I go all the way back with the Cubs to Richie Ashburn when they had the rotating managers and all. And
yeah, sure.
I worked with Richie for so many years with the Phillies, and interesting factor, Richie had his ideas about that, and you would think with Mr. Wrigley and the Wrigley Enterprise that there would be no way they could not come together with a general manager and an organizational skill to win, but they never did.
Did they once just pick the batting order out of a hat, or was that another team?
No, that's been done. That's been done a few times. The Cubs weren't the only ones that did that. There have been some other teams that have done it, but you've certainly just gone over the highlights. Doug and I were chatting about the book. You got many very, very interesting stories. Maybe you touch on a couple of others.
Well, some are big. I mean, like the '69 Mets. Some are obvious. And some are lesser known. I have to tell you, I was not that familiar with Billy Mills. Are you guys track and field fans?
No, not really.
Marginal.
Okay, well,
not that much.
Billy Mills grew up poor on an Indian reservation. His parents died at a young age. His father says to him before he passes on that he knew Billy was upset over the loss of his mother, and he says, "You really have to, fly. You have to grow wings and fly, and Billy took that to run track and field. He winds up, and he faces discrimination. I mean, when he's in college running, I mean, he had stories where they would take a group photo. He would run cross country, and they'd take a group photo, and they'd say, "Hey, you stand off to the side while we take a picture," because he had darker skin than the other guys. So he winds up running for the United States in the 1964 Olympics in Tokyo. He's not even the top U.S. qualifier. And he winds up winning the gold medal in the 10,000 meters. And that audio cut is on there. And you should hear one of the announcers screaming, "Look at Mills! Look at Mills!" As he's a diabetic, and he has diabetes, and he has to save one last push. P.S. He's the only American who had ever won the 10,000 meters at the Olympics up to that point, and none has won it since. When the race was over, the world record holder, Ron Clark of Australia, was asked, "Were you afraid of Billy Mills?" And he said, "Hell, afraid of him? I never heard of him."
Wow. You talk about athletes with diabetes, Don. You know very well Bobby Clark, another athlete that dealt with that, didn't he, with Flyers?
Absolutely. Bobby wasn't drafted. The reason he wasn't drafted earlier was because the Flyers took a flyer, if you can use that.
Yeah. And what a great player he turned out to be.
Turned out to be just a spectacular player. But your story is a little bit analogous to the book that was so popular over the last 2 years or so, where they were on the life raft, and he was a runner from California. I can't. Right off the top of my head, I can't think of the name. It was bestseller for the last 2 years. Same girl that wrote Secretariat.
Okay. You mean who wrote Seabiscuit?
Or Seabiscuit, maybe.
The Seabiscuit book, right? Yeah.
Yes,
right.
I know what you're talking about. I haven't read it, but the thing about our book is that we have boys and girls and blacks and whites and Latinos and Asian and Native Americans and handicapped. We tell the story of the great Althea Gibson, which really isn't told enough. She's referred to as the female Jackie Robinson. Not only was she the first black to ever enter the U.S. Open or Wimbledon, she was the first to ever win them, and she won them both twice. And doesn't quite get the acclaim for that. She was forced to ride the back of the bus in South Carolina, where she went to train in tennis, and then she said the best thing for her is to go from the back of the bus to the meeting the Queen of England at Wimbledon. Another story is that are you familiar with the Monterey kids who won the Little League World Series?
Right.
In 1957. Now here are a bunch of kids who had never seen baseball played. They would gather around the radio and listen to Brooklyn Dodgers telecasts in Spanish. So they decided, hey, we're going to try to play this game. And they didn't have shoes or gloves. And they played on dirt fields. They hadn't seen the game played. And they wind up, after a couple of years, a local guy who his claim to fame was he was a bat boy in San Antonio. And he teaches them how to play baseball. And they go on a 3-day visa to the United States in 1957, and they win a couple of games. So through their congressmen, they work it out, or legislators work it out, where they can continue to play as long as they win. So they win the Texas Regional, then they win the South Regional. They wind up going to Little League World Series. And they have to play one game, and they didn't want to play it because that's when they siesta during the middle of the day. But they made them play anyway. And they wound up in the championship game, and the kid, Angel Macias, pitches a perfect game. It's the only perfect game ever pitched in the championship game. And these kids then go to Brooklyn on a trip, and they meet the Dodgers, who they had only listened to on the radio, and then they wound up going to the White House and meeting President Eisenhower. So, I mean, I love that story, too.
Oh, that's a picture in here with the team and President Eisenhower, also with Richard Nixon. Some great photos in the book.
Yeah, you know what? Another story which I got a kick out of, and again, I didn't know as much about. I don't claim to all these. You start researching it. The 1950 U.S. soccer team that beat England in the World Cup. Now it was a preliminary round game. But the U.S. team was called the Band of No Hopers. Now, England invented soccer. Their team was known as the Kings of Soccer. They had the biggest world stars at the time. The U.S. team was just a ragtag bunch that was thrown together. They had the Penn State soccer coach put the team together. They were all part-time. One guy worked at his father's uncle's funeral home in St. Louis. Another guy couldn't play for the team because his boss wouldn't let him off work. Now, they go down and play in the World Cup, and there's not a single photograph or piece of video of the goal they scored. They won the game 1-0. But there's no video or anything because all the photographers were gathered around the English goal waiting for them to score. The game was not televised. So there's no footage or shot whatsoever of the goal. In fact, when they transmitted the score of the game 1-0 back to the United Kingdom, they figured it was a misprint, so they printed in England 10-0. Wow.
just to go back for a second, Unbroken was the name of the book I was trying to think.
Unbroken. Okay. Yeah.
Unbroken. Yeah. I give that credit to my wife.
Well, I mean, she's actually listening.
She's actually. Len, when she heard you were on.
No, all those years on broadcast.
She said, "I cannot miss Len Berman. If he's going to be on tonight, I want to be absolutely sure that I want to listen to the show."
Yeah. All those years I was broadcasting, I get home, my wife said, "Oh, were you on?"
I had the same problem.
But speaking of that, Len, you're talking to a guy that watched you growing up in Long Island, going back to the Channel 2 days, and I know you started in Boston, but you came to New York and you did those great weekend shows too, like the sports fantasy show. I used to like that show very much.
Thank you. Yeah, we used to have this thing where we would invite viewers to tell us their sports fantasy, and we'd go out and try to fulfill them. We actually once had a kid from New Jersey in a kid from Chicago in a wheelchair playing Michael Jordan, who was also in a wheelchair. And they played a game of wheelchair basketball against each other, and the kid beat him. He was a teenager. And we had a minister stand in goal against Wayne Gretzky, and he knew he didn't have a prayer. So there you go. Anyway, we used to. Someone just brought, I was mentioning, today's the anniversary of Don Larsen's perfect game, so I posted on Facebook,
I saw that.
I remember where I was when that happened. We were dismissed from school, and we used to run to the local bar to find out the score, and there was no one in the bar, and here the game was 2 hours and 6 minutes. The game was over. Don Larsen had pitched a perfect game, and I turned to him. That's what the bartender told us. And I turned to my school buddy and said, "What's a perfect game?"
Well, one of the interesting parts about Len, and I'm a Brooklynite, to be honest with you. My family's all from that area, and I followed the Dodgers until they left. One of the things I realized that baseball was no longer a sport; it was a business. As soon as the Dodgers left to go to California with the Giants, but I think his biggest story of that game was Sal Magley.
Yeah, pitched a great game.
He pitched a great game, and he had been such a rival of the Dodgers for so many years, pitching for the Giants. The Dodgers actually hated Sal Magley, and he winds up pitching that. Go ahead.
What you were mentioning before about that Channel 2 stuff is that when I asked on Facebook for people to mention other moments that they remember that was really important to them, the most common answer was the Islanders winning their first Stanley Cup in 1980 when Bobby Nystrom had that overtime goal. And I laughed because that game, people don't remember, that game was televised on CBS Network. It was the only game they televised the entire year. They decided, Eddie Einhorn, the sports guru who created TBS and the old college basketball stuff, decided to put the game on CBS Sports Network. And I was at the local CBS station, so I did a post-game show locally in New York. And so I'm sitting on the set when Nystrom scores that goal, and we proceed to have this little Stanley Cup celebration on this channel that never covered hockey ever. So
I think Dan Kelly did that game, right? St. Louis Blues announcer, if I remember
absolutely.
right.
I wound up working with Dan. I was hired to be the host of the NHL Monday night game of the week, and I lasted 3 whole games before they decided they didn't want me there. But got to work with Dan Kelly out of the Forum in Montreal, and that was a great thrill for me. He was a terrific broadcaster.
Len, I don't remember whether that was. I don't remember whether that was the year we're so much into replay now and bad calls. But was that the year that the Flyers got robbed on the offside?
Yeah, I think they claimed that that Nystrom play was offside.
Yeah.
Well, you can claim all you want, but the Islanders have 4 Stanley Cups, so there, Philadelphia, take that.
Nobody would know it now. They don't even know they're playing.
No, the Islanders. That's a shame what's happening. So that's people remember the good old days, but I think that's part of parcel. What makes the book appealing is young people don't always know. To them, the basketball world begins and ends with LeBron James or Kobe Bryant for a young person today. They don't understand in 1965 there was an NCAA championship game where 5 blacks played against 5 whites in the starting lineup. That never happened before, and it was earth-shaking, and how it changed the face of collegiate sports in the South. And, of course, Texas Western beats Adolph Rupp and Pat Riley in Kentucky in the championship game, and ever since, and then all of a sudden all the schools down south said, hey, we have to get us some of those black athletes.
Yep, and they're certainly still talking about the Duke team that played all the blacks that was written off the, nobody ever knew about it. Really, they sort of kept it under wraps, but they had that game, and it was the first really time, I guess, that the blacks actually played against the white team at Duke, and that goes down in history as one of the most unusual games of all time.
What would happen was that even teams that even were in the North and had black players would always make sure that they had a white or two in the lineup. I remember when the Knicks first had an entire roster of blacks, it became a big story in the New York Times. The headline was the all black Knicks, and this wasn't this was maybe sometime in the 70s.
People don't realize how short a time it's been, and what's happened since. You forget about Jackie Robinson. That was just a great individual story. But the whole idea of changing the complexion of sports in all areas, from track and field, which was always dominated by black athletes, and then you go right through to basketball, which is really dominated. It's a city game.
Well, it's a changing world. I often think about Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and we idolize and rhapsodize about these guys, but the truth is they never faced black or Latino ball players. So, were they really that great, or were they just the best white players?
Don, before we run out of time tonight, I did want to ask you a little bit. I know you mentioned before you do a lot of work posting things, Facebook, your website. The whole business has kind of changed, hasn't it, from when you started doing television sports. Obviously, local news is kind of eliminating that aspect of the business, unfortunately. How do you see it going?
Well, I think it has changed a great deal. When I first got involved, there were 3 major TV stations in each market, the ABC, CBS, and NBC affiliates, and now, my goodness, with all the cable and satellite providers and internet radio and everyone else, there's just all these outlets. But I still think, and I'll fight this, and I'm probably swimming upstream, that there's still a place for a good local broadcaster, either on the radio or on television, because as many ESPNs as there can possibly be, and Fox Sports Nets, and now CBS and NBC have their own cable networks, no one's going to know the local teams and the local players and the local significance of anything like the local broadcasters. So I think there'll always be a place for a good broadcaster, but he has to have knowledge, and he has to have strong thoughts. He doesn't have to be Mr. Opinionated at all times, but he certainly has to have opinions, and I think there's a place for that person. So I'm not ready to write off the industry yet, but I do enjoy the other media. I enjoy online and having a website and all that stuff, but I think there's still a place for the traditional broadcasting as well.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that, and I'd say the same thing for radio. To me, most people want to know what's going on in their area. I mean, not necessarily just as big as New York is, or Philadelphia is, or Chicago. Every town across the country, people want to know what's happening in their town.